And so let's begin. Since this is actually our last event in the Spring Nature of Writing series in partnership with the North Cascades Institute, we can't think of a better way to round out the series with the event tonight. I would like to invite Kim Nelson to say a few words. Kim is the marketing and executive assistant for North Cascades Institute. So welcome, Kim.
Hi, thank you for having me, Claire. Before I get started, I want to first acknowledge the Coast Salish people who have stewarded the land where I'm standing since time immemorial. Since I'm in Anacortes, I want to personally acknowledge the Swinomish Indian tribal community, as well as the Samish Indian Nation. I offer this acknowledgement as a first step in honoring the land that we share, as well as a call towards further learning and action in support of our Indigenous neighbors. Thank you. As Claire mentioned, I am here today representing North Cascades Institute. And just in case you're not familiar with our organization, we are a conservation nonprofit, and our mission is to inspire environmental stewardship through transformative learning experiences in nature. Accordingly, we offer programs for people of all ages and backgrounds to explore and engage with nature in the hopes that they'll one day go on to protect these wild and sacred places. North Cascades Institute offers many different programs, including Mountain School, a 3-day overnight environmental education experience for 5th grade students. And we are also currently recruiting high school students for our Youth Leadership Adventures program, which involves multi-day backcountry and canoe camping trips, focusing on climate change solutions and building leadership skills. Additionally, we offer a diverse suite of adult and family programs, which includes field excursions, family camps, art and writing retreats, online classes, and even boat tours. Most of our programs typically take place at the North Cascades Environmental Learning Center on the beautiful wooded shoreline of Diablo Lake in the heart of North Cascades National Park. We just recently reopened our facility to the public, so if you haven't been before, or if it's been a while, now is the perfect time to plan a visit. And I also want to take a moment just to give a big plug for our many upcoming online classes and field excursions. We'll be covering topics such as landscape photography, plants, birds, insects, painting, geology, history, lichens, mushrooms, even wildlife tracking. So you can find out all about these programs and sign up by visiting our website at ncascades.org. That's the letter N as in northcascades.org. And you can also be the first to find out about our upcoming programs and events by signing up for our online newsletter. And I will drop those links in the chat just momentarily. Or somebody else will do it. Thank you, Claire. She's the best. So tonight, I'm very excited that for our very special guest, Robert Michael Pyle. Bob is the author of 14 books, including Sky Time and Gray's River, Chasing Monarchs, Where Bigfoot Walks, and Wintergreen, this book here, which is one of my favorites by him, and it also won the John Burroughs Medal for Best Natural History Book. Bob is a Yale-trained ecologist, a former Guggenheim Fellow, and he founded the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation, so just very impressive man. Additionally, he is a friend of North Cascades Institute, having taught classes for going all the way back to our founding back in 1986, and he remains on the Institute's advisory council to this very day. Bob is here tonight to discuss his newest book, Nature Matrix, as Claire mentioned, and that was also a finalist for the 2021 PEN America Literary Award. And joining Bob tonight is Bill Dietrich. Bill is a retired Seattle Times journalist who won the Pulitzer Prize in 1990 for covering the Exxon Valdez oil spill. He is the author of 22 books, both nonfiction and fiction, including Final Forest, Napoleon's Pyramids, and the North Cascades, Finding Beauty and Renewal in the Wild Nearby, which is one of my favorites. So without further ado, please welcome Bob and Bill. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kim.
Bob, I'm just going to add to the introduction a little bit. You are the only, we've known each other for many years, but you're the only author that I personally know who has been portrayed in a movie. This movie is called The Dark Divide. The actor, David Cross, did a wonderful job, but I must say that you're also probably the only author I know who actually, has more presence, has sort of this humorous gravity that you bring to the natural discussion of the natural world. And it was so much fun to watch that movie, but also think of the real Bob. And so for those who are watching tonight, if you ever get a chance to go to a Bob Pyle reading or seminar in person, I think you'd really enjoy it. It's remarkable. And that movie, by the way, Dark Divide, I believe it's still available for rent on Amazon. Is that right?
It's on all of the streaming services with the exception of Netflix.
Yeah, it's a great movie, so you'd really enjoy it. One other thing I wanted to mention before we hear from Bob, well, he's been a writer. I mean, he's been a ranger, a national park ranger early in his career. He's a essayist, a nonfiction book author, a novelist. My count was 25 books. I don't know, you can clarify which is correct.
Yeah, it's grown from the 14, Kim, time goes by.
And he collaborated with Chris Novoselic from Nirvana on an album of acoustic song poems. He's a poet as well. And so that's pretty hip, especially for a 73-year-old. So that's cool. And but what we thought we'd do, I want to give Bob a chance to read a little bit from Nature Matrix. And then after that, I'm going to ask him some questions. And I think we'll have a good time tonight. Go ahead, Bob.
Thank you, Bill. And thank you, Kim, for that very sweet and thoughtful, for those two sweet and thoughtful introductions. It was wonderful. No, Kim, you got it just right. You didn't miss out anything. It's just numbers change over time. It's just the books tend to grow kind of like mushrooms. You know, they pop up as the years go by. As Bill knows, the author of many, many books and in many genres. Bill is one of my favorite authors in both thrillers and natural history and straight out first-class journalism of the natural world, which of course includes humans. And so what an honor to be here with you here tonight, Bill, as my interlocutor, and Kim, to be introduced by you for North Cascades Institute. I know Saul is with us too, and had a wonderful night here the other night. But I owe so much to North Cascades Institute for getting me into the field year after year after year, usually with my dear late wife, Tia, who was played by the way, Deborah Messing in the movie you mentioned, Bill. And
yeah, that was nice.
She does a stunning job of representing Tia, who many of you will know and miss. But North Cascades was good to us in terms of, in many, many ways, people-wise, student-wise, asking the constant question, what do you see out there? What do you attend to? And then physically getting us out there with inquisitive minds. Such a good time. And it's wonderful that North Cascades is carrying on strength to strength under Saul's leadership all these years. And Saul, my personal congratulations, my first chance to say it kind of in person on your retirement from there. What an edifice you built with all your good colleagues, including Kim now tonight. With that having been said, I'd like to say a couple of words about the book to give you an idea of how it came to be here and why I'm here with it tonight, because it has a strange and checkered past. Now, when I came to Village Books last, I think it was from my novel, Magdalena Mountain. And that book took 40 years from my very first draft to get it into print. But this book beats it. It was 50 years from the time I first wrote this book to the time it was finally published. So in a way, it's my, okay, I almost got cooled out by an elk last night on White Pass. I mean, 6 inches from the nose of my car was the nose of this bull elk. And if I had been sent to the higher realms by the elk last night, this book would be both my first book and my last book. I hope as things go, it will not be my last book. I got a few in play, but so far it is my first and my latest. Now, this book, I was deeply, deeply honored for the award it won the other night from Pan America. I'll come back to that in a few minutes. But first, I want to read a little short bit from, a couple little bits about its origin. Nature Matrix New and Selected Essays. This is from the intro, which is called Pyrex, Postcards, and Pantsers, The Birth of Nature Matrix. My first office as a grad student was in a good room facing an inner plaza in the fine old college Gothic forestry school, Anderson Hall at the University of Washington. A little later, I had to move into another one of the forestry buildings, Bloedel Hall. Now that setting was not as amenable. The innards of Bloedel were as functional as the outer surface was aesthetic. My study space in the basement was about as sterile and antiseptic as a room might be. No stone walls or old wooden desks as are found in graduate student crannies elsewhere, only plastic and cinder blocks. No mullioned windows either, through which to spy on squirrels and siskins. My desk faced a cinder block wall. In fact, the only thing in that room with any character or animation at all was a transparent Pyrex water pipe running ceiling to floor right beside my desk. The water flow was intermittent, like fleshing. So at first I watched reluctantly, earnestly hoping I wouldn't see something brown coming down that was definitely not an otter. In time, of course, I began adding some sparing furnishings just to keep me sane while cooped up in this cinder block cell. A poster of a turn in flight for uplifting inspiration. A woodcut of a forest clear cut to keep me from slipping into an unconcerned idle. A color picture of aspen-clad mountains in Colorado for occasional dreams, and another of a butterfly on a thistle to bring me back to the reality of my thesis, which was going to be an interpretive field guide to Washington butterflies. Just for comfort, I added an FM radio for soothing Baroque and a few crispy sycamore leaves on the floor for counterpoint crunching. Now, one particular evening, my intention was to concentrate solely on my thesis. I soon knew, though, that I was going to be subverted. I should have stopped with the Colorado aspens, but feeling the need to cover a part of the big plastic surface of my desk with something palatable, I had smuggled 4 postcards into my mental monastery. 3 I could glance at, enjoy, and then subordinate to my work. The Haida Thunderbird panel, the Glen Canyon Moss Spring, and the Samuel Palmer Sepia. But the 4th one, and I knew it should have stayed at home in my playroom, haunted me. It pictured the Lüneburger Heide of northern Germany, the great, massive heathlands on the North German plain. It conjured soft smells of heather, the evening sounds, and a throbbing, hurtful memory of an abominable act. Now, if you want to find out what the abominable act on the Lüneburger Heide was, you're going to have to read the book. But I'll go on from that to say that I couldn't help myself. I wrote an essay about that act, and I was, in fact, writing essays all through college. I had a teacher in 11th grade, Mrs. Braswell, who accused me of plagiarism because I had a bigger vocabulary than my friends. I didn't use it well. I wrote badly, but I could eke out an easy B and sometimes an A by just using big words. And she didn't reinforce that. And she made me feel bad. And I said, I'm never going to write another essay in my life. But by my freshman year of college, I started writing essays, mostly conservation propaganda, because we were a bunch of young conservation radicals at the time, and also natural history appreciation pieces. And I started publishing them. I got a piece in Audubon, and I got a piece about a student action that we did called the Union Bay Life After Death Resurrection Planting in a Life Park, classic 60s overload, in which we took over the Montlake Phil. Other people were taking over the president's office on Upper Campus and demanding peace and justice in the end of the Vietnam War. We took over the dump that had taken over the old marsh. We took over the Montlake Phil, and today, 50 years later, it's one of the best in-city habitats anywhere in the country. Well, I wrote about that, and that got me in my first piece of writing between the covers of a book in the Sierra Club book, Eco Tactics. So I was writing at that time, and I wrote about this event on the Lüneburger Heide, and then I said, oh my, I've almost got a book here. And there was a contest going on by the Dutton Company for the Man and His Environment Book Award contest. I thought, I'm going to whip out a book of my essays I've already written. And so while I was supposed to be doing my master's thesis, and ultimately did, I was writing a book in secret. Nobody knew that, down in my cellar, my cinder block cellar. And I came up with a manuscript. And I asked Victor B. Sheffer, the great wildlife biologist and writer, and one of our mentors around campus, recent winner of the John Burroughs Medal for Distinguished Nature Writing for the Year of the Whale, and a mentor to the young conservation activists around Seattle, if he would write a foreword for the book. Wisely, he declined to do it on spec. He replied that if I actually won the contest or got a contract, then he would consider it. But he did encourage me the enterprise. So I forged on, finished, and I sent it off. Well, I didn't win the contest, but it did start a dialogue, which led ultimately to the publication of a couple of other books down the line, and a number of those essays were published. And it ended me up with a manuscript, which I had called Nature Matrix. That centerpiece essay was sort of my view of how I thought things should go between humans and nature. You know, what would I have had to say at 22 years old? But I thought I had something to say. So that's why I call it that. And then I put it away in a drawer, and it stayed that way for a long time, until many years later, I was asked to write a piece for the centennial edition of Oryx magazine, the International Journal of Conservation Publishing in the UK, published by Fauna and Flora International. Now, I've been thinking of updating and expanding the title essay from the original Nature Matrix, and this seemed a chance to do it. So I went ahead, and the piece was finished and published in 2003, and it attracted a certain measure of international attention in those pre-social media days in the old-fashioned form of reprint requests. And since then, other essays riffing and refracting on related but different ideas and experiences accumulated. Some of them collected in my previous collection, Through a Green Lens, 50 Years of Writing for Nature, but others not. And I felt that this gathering body and a few more in progress clustered well beneath the Nature Matrix umbrella. So when I was next in Berkeley, Jack Shoemaker, one of the grand old men of American publishing and the founder of Counterpoint Press, who had published my novel, asked me whether I might have a new and selected essays up my sleeve. And I was astonished because no editor had ever actually asked me for essays. It's kind of a poison word in book sales. They'd say, do you have a nonfiction book in this or that, but not a collection of essays? And so I said to Jack, Jack, do I have the book for you? And the title too. And that's how the book came about. Counterpoint Press published it. As for Vic Sheffer, it's too late to include a foreword from him now that I've finally had a contract for Nature Matrix, nearly 50 years after that first attempt. He died in 2011 at the age of 104. He'd waited long enough for me to get it together. But if he had granted a lovely blurb to my book Wintergreen years before, and not so many years after my initial pretentious request. So I like to think that if he were still with us today, he might accede. And I wonder what he would have said. And I have to add, I also wonder what Mrs. Braswell would have said if she'd known that this book went on to win the Pan America Spielvogel Award for the art of the essay. I think it would have surprised her more than me. And that's my initial thing about the book and how I got to be here. Bill, take it away.
Yeah, so Bob, the Nature Matrix is interesting because it is, we can trace your life through this book. I mean, the essays proceed through time and quite interesting, but you yourself, I think, have chosen an interesting life. You live on the edge of a cut over part of the world, the Willapa Hills. You're actually in Grays River, lovely home, lovely place on the Columbia River near the mouth, but you don't live next to a national park by any means. You punched all the bells and whistles and whatnot that you're supposed to have a tenured academic career. I mean, you got a doctorate from Yale and butterfly conservation, you went to the University of Washington and so on. You could have had the normal academic life, and instead you chose a more difficult life of writing and speaking on your own. Or maybe not difficult, but at least it requires more entrepreneurship. And so I'm just curious why you did those things, why you kind of are where you are and why you do what you do.
Thank you, Bill. Wonderful question. In short, after, I had a very strong interest in biology and natural history and conservation and writing. I wanted to pursue all those things. And there was no curriculum for doing that at the University of Washington in the 1960s, but the classes were all there. Wonderful teachers, naturalists, writers, and conservation biologists. So I started forging my programs and taking the classes I wanted to take instead of the ones that fit any curriculum. And thank goodness in the end, I found a dean there, Alden Bell, who wanted to start up a new general studies program based on the one at Berkeley. Everything started at Berkeley and then moved on up to Seattle. And I ended up getting a degree called Nature Perception and Protection, the only one ever, I think. And that kind of suited me for writing and for natural history, but I kind of shorted the hard sciences and had to do some remedial on that later on. But that led to a master's in the forestry school in nature interpretation and my first book, which was Watching Washington Butterflies, an interpretive field guide to butterflies. From that, I got this Fulbright to England that set me back up more in the scientific end of conservation. And that's what the Xerces Society grew out of, my experience studying butterfly conservation in Britain in 71, 72. So when I came back from that, because of Xerces and because of that Fulbright, I had an invitation to come and study butterfly conservation in the scientific context at Yale. With my original mentor from 12 years old, I had met Charles Remington, the founder of the Lepidoptera Society back in 47. And at 12, he took an interest in me as a young lepidopterist. And at 23, he took an interest in me as a graduate student, said, come back and do a doctorate with me. So I did. And after I got that doctorate at Yale, I did intend, Bill, an academic career. But there were roadblocks to that at the time. And I hope no one will take me wrong with what I'm about to say. It's a pretty dangerous thing to say, probably in public, but it was a true experience. I was in a difficult demographic when I got my PhD at that time, which was a white male, because the academies were completely full of white males. Almost the entire faculty at Evergreen was white and male, and many of the other departments as well too. And so for some time I had lots of invitations to come and give job seminars, and the hires, affirmative action with, of course, my full political and heartful support had begun in a big way in the national park system and in the universities. Thank God it was about time. And frankly, I did not get the position in a number of them that went to women and people of color. And I was applauding that all the way politically. It so much had to happen, but I was it was a little bit difficult to be yet another white male PhD at that time. And that did deter me for a little while. I would have eventually got a job, of course, in academia, but because I didn't at first, I started doing jobs in nature conservation. For the Nature Conservancy, I was the Northwest Land Steward, and that's where I met Melody Allen, whom we later hired as the first executive director of the Xerces Society. And then I went to work for IUCN and World Wildlife Fund in Cambridge, in England, where I worked with Sue Wells, who was a great coral reef biologist, and we put out the first invertebrate red data book. So now I had a foot in IUCN, I had a foot in Nature Conservancy, I had a foot in academia. I'd done a lot of utility outfield teaching at Evergreen by this time, and I could have gone any of those three ways. But I knew that if I stayed in professional conservation, it was then going to be a desk, probably out of the field. And I was beginning to see what was happening with some of my friends who had taken the academic jobs. They were on the brink of stellar careers, but they weren't getting much of their own stuff written. And they weren't in the field nearly as much as they wanted. And so in 1982, after a house fire that changed a lot of things in my life, right here, the house was saved, thank goodness. I came back and I spent a winter with just me and the cat and the kerosene and the wreck of the house fire, and made the decision, none of the above professional routes. I'm going to write. That's what I really want to do. So I went freelance in the winter of '82, and it was tough for many years economically, to say the least. But I managed to keep this old farmhouse, and I kept my old Honda that I drove 500,000 miles. It's character in several of my books, and here we are, all those years later. So it kind of worked out. And you know, Bill, the funny thing is, I've got to do professional conservation biology also as a consultant for the National Park Service and others, but I never had to report to a desk. And I got to do academia also, because I began getting invitations as visiting professor and visiting writer and so on. So I got to be a professor at Montana and at Utah State, and work with wonderful faculty members for entire semesters, be called professor, and never go to a single faculty meeting. So in many ways, I got the best of all those worlds.
Funny how life works, isn't it? Yeah.
It can be,
Yeah.
if one's aware and if one says yes.
And why Wahkiakum? Why Willapa? Why that corner of the world?
Well, my studies in Washington butterflies at the University of Washington led me to understand that there were distinctive butterfly provinces around the state, where the different faunas that have evolved under the influence of glaciation or movement from the south, or the dry periods or the warming periods, whatever, sort themselves out around the state. You can sort of sort out the state with butterfly provinces. And I pursued that in my PhD to develop a mathematical means of detecting whether those were real or not, setting up the butterfly provinces for Washington, and then comparing them against the protected wildlands of Washington, all the areas that were set aside for purposes of biological conservation. And it led to, it was really one of the first studies in what became known as gap analysis, which became a whole field of conservation, detecting the gaps in the conservation system and then filling them in. So that worked out very nicely. Well, the one county in the whole state for which I could come up with absolutely zero butterfly data was Wahkiakum County. And I didn't know that's because it was clear cut about 10 times, and because it's all private timberland here, no national forest. And Bill, in the final forest, you write about all the ways in which the mosaic has occurred of a little bit of old growth, lots of managed forest, some truly overcut, poorly managed forest, and so on. But in the Willapa Hills, it's all private lands, and there is no national forest. The cutting was early, the cutting was often. It's one of the most heavily logged areas in the state. Another reason there weren't any butterfly data here is because it rains all the time. We get almost as much rain as Forks here. It truly is the rainforest. I tell people we get 10 meters of rain a year, and that's true. So I came here on weekends when I was working with Nature Conservancy in Portland, trying to get the first butterfly data. And on an August day in 1978, my field assistant and I came over here and actually found some butterflies in Wahkiakum. And we also, because I took them to see the old covered bridge that I'd seen once in earlier years. And from the covered bridge, I saw this old farmhouse that said, "For sale by owner." And my job in Portland was becoming pretty stressful. So was my wife at the time, Sally's gallery job. We both wanted to move out to the country and practice our art. And so I went to talk to the farmer then and there, started borrowing money to put up a down payment. And I said, that's where I want to live. And the clear cuts, the heavily managed landscape, I knew that'd be a challenge to my aesthetics, but it would also be a big challenge as a conservationist. I wanted to learn more about the managed forests. I wanted to not demonize the people that earn their livings from the land, but become part of their community. And that was a real challenge because Wintergreen is highly critical of certain logging practices. It's not an anti-logging book. It's an anti-bad logging book. It's against the kind of logging that hurts the people of the woods as well as the woods. And some people here began to actually read the book and get that. So 42 years later, I'm still here. I haven't been strung up or run out. And I think I've become a part of the community. I just put my new 40-year Grange pin I got the other night on. I've been a member of the Bruce River Grange for 40 years. I'm the old timer there now. I was always the kid in the Grange. No, I'm the senior member, which is weird. And so, Bill, that's why we're kayaking. It also lent great capacity for discovery because it had almost no natural history studies done here. David Douglas came here, took one look and split. Now, not many other people have done much natural history here. So even though the butterfly is probably one of the poorest butterfly counties in the country, I have been able to manage for the butterflies right here at Swede Park, my old homestead. My late wife, Tia, was a wonderful gardener, and she did a great deal for them. And we've actually learned a lot about butterflies here that nobody else had ever looked at before, and had a pretty good time with the birds and the mammals and things too. In this very room, I'm in the studio outside. I heard a thumping in here one night a few months ago. I thought it was a big mouse or a bushy-tailed wood rat. I went and looked behind that big Mount Rainier painting behind me. There was a spotted skunk, Spilogale, and the rest of it. And I didn't want it to spray in my studio, so I very gently whisked it out, this beautiful little skunk. And after it went, I wrote to Tony Angel, and I wrote to Dennis Paulson, and I wrote to all the great naturalists I know in the state. Dennis Paulson wrote back and he said, Bob, you're the only living Washington naturalist I know who has ever seen a spotted skunk alive.
Wow.
And I saw that in my own studio. So I've written, I wrote first wintergreen about these hills and living in a logged off land and what that's
Wonderful book.
Thank you. And then I followed up with a daughter of wintergreen called Sky Time and Grays River. I'm showing it because it's just out from Counterpoint. This is the old edition that people will know.
Yeah.
It's just come out in a new edition, updated from Counterpoint Press. And it tells its basic theme is I live here because I want to live in a place where I can go outside and be in nature immediately. And that's true everywhere because nature's everywhere, but to be surprised every day of my life. And I am. That's why I'm here, Bill.
Yeah. Well, you wrote another wonderful book called Where Bigfoot Walks. It's a search maybe for Bigfoot, maybe for the idea of Bigfoot. And so I got to ask you, does Bigfoot exist? He writes about this in the Nature Matrix, by the way.
Yes, and this book was adapted to the film that you mentioned, The Dark Divide. That's what the movie came from. Well, I'm going to do another very, very perhaps foolish and gutsy thing. I hope nobody was offended by my statements about being in the wrong demographic professorially. I hope that was all appropriate to say. Certainly it was appropriate what went down in those days and made a lot of difference to the workspace today. So I'm happy I talked about that. This one, I don't know if I'm going to be happy. I'm about to do a big reveal, Bill.
All right.
And you're, and Claire and Kim, and the 40 people we've got with us. I might regret this. Might go down to 20 people in 30 seconds. I've been able to say for some years, can't believe I'm doing this. I've been able to say for some years that I am probably 75% of the way there on Bigfoot. I'm a scientist. I wrote the book as a scientific book, but also as a literary book, and that in itself is a challenge, but that's what I try to do. I like to try to walk on Nabokov's high ridge between the mountainside of artistic imagination and the opposite slope of scientific knowledge. That's where I like to live. And that's where I've tried to hew out my territory as a writer. And so Where Bigfoot Walks is both a scientific book and it's also a literary book. And I came out of it open-minded, which I did not expect to do. It wasn't about trying to find Bigfoot or prove it or disprove it. It was about looking into the entire concept of Bigfoot, which of course does walk in the Northwest, whether it walks in flesh and blood or not. I got a Guggenheim Fellowship to do that. That's one of the reasons why Tom Putnam, the director, shifted the movie more toward the butterflies and away from the Bigfoot. Nobody would believe that I got a Guggenheim to study Bigfoot now, would they? That's the strangest thing. That's stranger than Bigfoot. Well, anyway, I found tracks, and the tracks were in conjunction with the major auditory experience I had that the Quileutes tell me was very like these sounds that they hear regularly. And in fact, at the first reading of my book at Elliott Bay Bookstore on publication day in 1995, a delegation of Quileutes came and played the tapes of those sounds. And it's what I heard in the very same place I found a series of 12 tracks. Since then, over the next 20 years, I had 2 more findings of tracks within a quarter mile of the original one with the very same dimension, speaking to the possibility of the same animal on the same home range over a 20-year period. And that's the third finding, there were juvenile tracks as well. So that experience, not having a better hypothesis, I say that I'm very open to the actual existence of that animal, which is surprising as a biologist. I'm not the only one, but I'm one of very few who is. But I would say, I can't say I believe it because I haven't seen it. Well, Bill,
All
2
right.
nights ago, I saw the bugger.
What?
I saw it 2 nights ago.
What?
You're the second person I have told. You're the 43 first people I've told. And I can't believe I'm doing this on Zoom. But I did. I was coming over White Pass. I was about 25 miles from the Dark Divide, about 35 miles from where I found the tracks 3 times on Highway 12. And I was about 8 miles, let's see, I was 7 miles east of White Pass. So that put me about 17 miles east of where Jim Fielder, one of the best biologists I've ever known, a great high school biology teacher in Bellevue for years. He's not with us any longer. But when I signed the contract for the book and got the fellowship, Jim pled with me not to associate myself with Bigfoot. He said, don't write this book, don't do this study. It will typecast you as a Bigfoot nut and nobody will ever read you again. I said, Jim, if I'm not typecast as a butterfly nut now after 6 butterfly books, I'm not worried about being typecast. And I went ahead and did it. And of course, the book has actually brought me a lot of respect, I think, as well as no doubt some ridicule from some quarters, mostly people who haven't read it. But Jim called me the next summer and he said, Bob, I've seen it. I said, you've seen what? He said, I've seen Bigfoot. He said, it crossed Highway 12 in front of me, squatted, urinated, walked over to the other side of the road, and walked up the slope and into the forest. And he was less than 100 feet from it. He said, I went from being a Bigfoot complete skeptic to a Bigfoot born again in 10 seconds. And this is one of the best biologists and most skeptical people I know. I was about 17 miles from that very same spot 2 nights ago. Yeah, seriously, Kim. And I had just had earlier, I was going slowly because I had that close encounter with an elk. And then a herd of elk right after that. And there was fog. When I got up on top of White Pass, it was snowing hard. It was 2 nights ago. And a lot of swirling fog, but it was clear down here and it wasn't yet dusk. There was still color discernible on the elk and on the trees. And I'm going along really quite slowly now because I know there are elk on the road. I can't be more than 20 miles an hour. And I've got good peripheral vision and I saw another movement up above me, just across the opposite lane and up the slope about 8 feet, the forest began. There are trees of about 10 to 12 inches spaced a couple of feet apart. So a fairly open forest, no foliage down low. And I saw this big motion. I said, oh, another elk's up there, and looked up at the elk. The legs were moving. There were only 2 legs. It was much taller than an elk. And it had an arm hanging down on the side, and it did not have a big white butt when it disappeared between 2 trees into the forest. I only saw it for seconds. And I cannot promise you my mind was not playing tricks on me, but it was no other animal. It was nothing else I can imagine it to have been. It was absolutely classic of all the field marks it's supposed to have. I would judge from the near position. I couldn't have been 30 feet from it, 30 feet, 35 at the outside. I would judge 6 to 8 feet and bulky, brown, darker than the trees, but not dark. Absolutely not a bear, not an upright bear striding into the forest between the trees.
Frightening or thrilling?
Certainly not frightening. No, not remotely frightening. At the end of the movie, you know, there's the scene where the spoiler, where the projectile hits the car and I get the hell out of there. That's most of the episodes in the movie, though some of them were somewhat exaggerated. Most of them actually did happen, and that was absolutely out of the book and the real life. It wasn't a rock, though, it was a piece of wood that struck the top of my car. And yeah, I peeled out, I was scared. And then I came back and found the tracks. There was no coming back this night. I had to get on over the pass. It was, the snow was coming. Anyway, it was up above the road. It was getting dark. I wish I could have come back the next day and looked for tracks there. But no, I wasn't at all frightened. I was just flabbergasted. I was gobsmacked because I've been studying this thing off and on. I'm not obsessed. This isn't my primary occupation by any means, but I've remained connected to Bigfoot studies, and I read the smart stuff, and I talk with the smartest people looking into it, I believe. And I keep apprised without doing anything about it online or anything like that. But I'm not looking for it, but my eyes are always open. I'm always attending, particularly when I'm in the Dark Divide, where I found tracks 3 times. And when I was working on the book, I spent endless hours driving around those back roads of the Dark Divide, the log roads, looking, keeping my eyes open. But nobody ever sees it that way. When people have sightings, and there are a number of intelligent, sober-minded sightings reported that are difficult to dismiss, they occur when one is, of course, not looking. And I feel that this is what I saw. So I have to say now, I haven't even asked myself this question yet. Do I believe yet? Well, I would say I'm very, very close right now to being able to say I accept its actual existence as a member of the Washington fauna. But I do recognize the brevity of my sighting, the fact that my adrenaline was up from the elk, and that I could be wrong. So let's say I bumped up another 10%. I'm 95%. Do I believe? Well, I haven't had an extended sighting, but I'm darn close now. So there I am. Yeah, we've dropped down to about 9 people still listening. So no, we actually just gained one.
Yeah, well, we're on a roll. I'm not going to ask you about the UFOs, which have been in the news, but I am going to, in the book, you've got an essay about kind of looking at the universe, and you're not a theist, you're not an atheist, you are an all-theist. And can you explain that at all? I thought it was a very interesting essay.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll do that actually with the second reading I was going to do, Bill.
Okay.
It's not very long, and that's exactly what I was going to read. It's from an essay called All in All is All We Are, or All-Theism. Once in college, the essay begins working out my own spiritual questioning over the decades, coming to a point of being recognized. I'm a rationalist, I'm a physicalist, but I find the term atheism to be unappealing and not inclusive enough. But pantheism carries too much baggage and woo-woo, and I've come up with this term for myself. I call myself an all-theist. Either everything is divine or nothing is divine. Take your pick, and I don't care. So here's how it came about. Once in college, studying conservation, I began to encounter eloquent restatements, as in John Muir. Restatements of what Darwin talked about in The Origin of Species, when he encapsulated everything as the tangled bank. Everything is in the tangled bank. Name of another one of my books. Such as in John Muir. When we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe. And a little slant in Aldo Leopold. To keep every cog and wheel is the first precaution of intelligent tinkering. Endless iterations of the same principle jumped up from Buddhist translations, such as Gary Snyder's, from Buddhist translations, such as Gary Snyder's, and in his own poems. Further on, in John Steinbeck and Ed Ricketts' magical book, Log from the Sea of Cortez, I read, "All things are one thing, and that one thing is all things." And ecology has a synonym, which is all. But maybe the ultimate boiling down of the idea to its greatest simplicity and absence of ambiguity came along in Kurt Cobain's All Apologies in Nirvana's 1993 album In Utero. All in all is all we are. Says it all. And then I go on to say, about my idea of all-theism, hardly de novo, mine is probably one of the oldest ideas alive, but its real application would be new. And what would it look like? Excuse me. But its real application would be new. And what it would look like is what I have tried to describe in Nature Matrix, both the essay by that name and this book as a whole. For what is the matrix, if not the rich resin that bonds us all together in the glittering amber of the whole thing? And what is that whole, that anything at all could exist outside of it? Humans have tried in so many clever ways to do just that, to live outside of it, with surprising, if illusory and temporary, success. But we should know better by now. Or have we entirely ignored our teachers, such as Walt Whitman, who in Leaves of Grass advised us to behold the great rondure, the cohesion of all, how perfect. And how does that differ really from all in all is all we are? Walt and Kurt may have spoken in different vernaculars, but they were speaking the same truth, and we can't ignore them any longer. The jig is up. All in all is all there is. The whole is the whole deal, and the sweet current of evolution is running fast. It's time for everyone to recognize that common flow and step inside. The water's fine.
Which is an excellent example of Bob's writing. And it's also a good time, I think, to give our audience a chance to ask some questions as well. Claire, you might want to come back in. There you are.
Thank you,
Well, I'm just sitting here and stunned, really. This
I am too. I can't believe I did that.
This was great. In fact, in the chat, somebody said, "This is the best Zoom reading ever." After you,
Well, I had some help.
as soon as you said that, my husband is watching in the other room, and I took off, ran into. Are you hearing this? So, thank you for sharing that with us, that revelation. I'll go ahead and one of the audience questions is a fair question. Audrey wants to know if you were drinking that night.
A very fair question. Let me say that there's no place I would rather make my big reveal than Village Books, one of the dearest places on earth to me. And let's all recognize that in the 6th grade extinction event, and you know I always say this when I'm at the store, that one of the things we're losing is our independent and neighborhood and family bookstores. And we must all give them praise, recognize them for the benisons they are, and thank Village for being there. And my 1st grade night with the Bigfoot book was at Elliott Bay. So that goes to them too, of course, and 1,000 independent bookstores in between. And don't you dare anybody ever tell me I just bought your book from Mama Monster, because I'll tell you who does not need your help at this time. And I'll tell you who does is every independent bookstore. So go to Village Books, and Claire and Kim will be happy to take your orders. Now, is it Amber? Amber's question? Kimberly.
Oh, Audrey, I believe.
Audrey, I'm sorry.
Audrey, yes. Audrey wanted to know if maybe you were imbibing the night that you saw Bigfoot.
No, Audrey, I'm sorry. I called you Kimberly and Amber. I was not. I absolutely was not. I was taking a big, long trip. I had just been to the Hanford Reach National Monument, up to the lookout on the tip top of the Waluki slope, looking for butterflies and spring wildflowers. And it was a very long drive back to Deep River, Grays River. And No, I absolutely was not drinking. In the Bigfoot book, the night that I have the profound auditory experience, and then find the tracks after that in the same place, I had one beer at the crest of the Dark Divide to wish it good night, because, or to wish it cheers, because I had been spending the entire month in the wilderness and the Dark Divide, as is depicted more or less in the movie. And so I had one, but I do say in the book, it was important to realize that was the only beer I had that night. This night, however, I had no alcohol, whatever, no stimulants, except
Okay.
the adrenaline from the elk. That was it.
Okay, well, it's a good question. It's definitely a
Very
fair
good.
question,
It's
I think.
very-
Yeah.
very-
And Neva has a more of a comment than a question, but she did say this is not a question, but I want to say thank you, Robert, for sharing your experience with Bigfoot. I had an experience of hearing and smelling what I believed to be Bigfoot when I was 12 years old, and never share. So she said she admires your courage. We all need to hear the truth. So that was from Neva. I actually have a question for Bill.
Oh, just before you do,
yes.
Claire, let me say that what you said at the beginning of the reading, first of all, about acknowledging that Kim said about acknowledging our antecedents here, of the
Yes.
people who live here. I'm so glad that was said, because of course the Bigfoot, Sasquatch, say latex, Oma lore goes back all through their culture and is very, very rich. And that's much of what the book is about. And one of the most affecting scenes in the movie is the scene with the stunning Native American cast that we had. And one of the Native American actresses, also named Kimberly, has just won a major Red Nation Best Actress Award for her role in the movie. But the other thing that you said was this is a safe space, didn't you?
Yes.
And thank you for that, because you made me feel safe to be able to vouchsafe this extremely risky thing for me to have said here tonight. So thank you for that. And thank you, Audrey.
So I just want to know if Bill has ever had any experience with Bigfoot sightings.
No, not at all. I've never seen
Nothing.
anything supernatural at any level. That doesn't mean I dismiss it, but I just haven't had the luck to come across it either.
Okay.
I would like to say that I know you use the word broadly, Bill, but I do not consider Bigfoot, if it does exist, to be remotely supernatural. And in fact, that's really what all theism is a rejection of the supernatural. Because to me, I've never felt that nature was wanting in any fundamental way that requires a supernatural.
It's interesting. Yeah. One thing I will say is I think many people in the outdoors, certainly myself, have felt that allness, that connection, that sort of universal oneness that you talk about there. So I think that's is going to resonate with people.
I agree. I love the concept of all theism, and I love that you connected Walt Whitman and Kurt Cobain. That just made me so happy.
Well, I'll tell you what, Walt and Kurt are talking about a lot of the same stuff, and it's not just that one song either. I tell you, when you get into the, I didn't really get to know Nirvana's music. I got to do this first. Libby Mills, I'm so glad to see you're here tonight. I've missed you so much. Yeah, I want to get together again around the campfire too. No, I did, I was too old to have, I wasn't, again, in the right demographic to have really gotten into Nirvana at the time. So it took me a while. But when I started first being a neighbor of, and then a political and communitarian colleague and co-conspirer with Chris Novoselic, the bassist and co-founder of Nirvana, who lives one bridge over from me. He's my neighbor on the next watershed over. And then when we started making poetry music together for our album, which is called Butterfly Launches from Sparpole. If anybody wants to get the CD or the vinyl LP, just go to butterflylaunch.com. That's our website. And when Krista and I started making music and poetry together, but long before that, I thought I really want to know Nirvana's music. So I did study it and listen to a lot. And the best way in is the MTV Unplugged concert, because the delivery by Kurt and the boys is pretty raucous. And you can't necessarily at first get the beauty of the lyrics and the melodies. Kurt was a superb lyricist, of course, but also and poet, but a splendid melodist. And you don't necessarily always get that in the Nirvana delivery. But listen to Sinead O'Connor singing all apologies. Oh my God,
Yes.
it's as beautiful as Hoagie Carmichael, I'm telling you. So there's a lot of philosophy that runs through Leaves of Grass that also runs through Kurt Cobain. And that's, funnily enough, that's how Chris and I got together to do our art together, because he does a radio show on KMUN community radio, and sometimes he'll mash up poetry with music. And he had Leaves of Grass, read by Orson Welles, mashed up with John Fahey guitar. And it was wonderful. And I said, Chris is the master of our Grange, because it's such a communitarian organization as he is. And I said to Chris, let's do that at Grange. I'll read some Leaves of Grass. You play some John Fahey type guitar, because he always brings an acoustic guitar to Grange. We play Home in the Range and Happy Trails and things. He doesn't really rock out at Grange. And he said, fine, but the heck with that, let's compose our own. So we composed our very first one. It's actually a very beautiful video you can find on YouTube. Just go to Notes from the Edge of the Known World, or go to Novoselic Notes or Pyle. There's a lot more on Chris, of course, but it's a beautiful song that he composed for it. I think the poem's a good one. It's a long one, all natural history images. And we did that because of the combination, funnily enough, of Walt Whitman and Kurt Cobain, ultimately.
Oh, that's great. I
Chris,
love that.
Chris' best friend. And of course, Chris was devastated when we lost Kurt, and that's what we owe his living down here in Willapa to, probably.
Yeah. Well, about writing nature essays, we do have a question from an attendee. I don't know their name. Mr. Pyle, what advice do you have for would-be nature essay writers? What makes a successful nature essay?
Thank you. Is there a name attached with that?
There is not. No.
Okay. Thank you, dear person, for that question. Darn good one. I will give you 3 things that I think, in my opinion, make for a good nature essay. First of all, recognize that every single essay ever written is a nature essay. And there is no such thing as nature writing or environmental writing. They're good, honorable terms. I still use them for shorthand to mean writing that has more plants and animals than usual. But there's another essay in Nature Matrix, by the way, that makes my point. One of the new ones. It's called Bright Lights, Big City is a classic nature book. You know, the hyper urban New York cocaine yuppies book that Jay McInerney wrote called Bright Lights, Big City, when he was in the Brat Pack of writers. People think of that as the ultra urban book, no nature book there. But in that essay, I show why it's absolutely a nature book. Got a lot of plants and animals that nobody realized were in there. But not only that, the action is driven by coca just as much as the action is driven by several other plants in Michael Pollan's book. So, you know, you can't get away from nature writing. So that's the first thing to realize, is that everything you write is nature writing. It's just that some nature writing has more of the species besides ourselves, and some of it's got a very limited fauna of just one species of upright hominoid ape. So that's the first thing to recognize, is that it's all nature. Don't think you have to totally immerse yourself in posies and froggies to write a nature essay. Bring people in, you know, bring the connection between people and the rest of nature in. That's one of the most compelling things. And so that's the first thing, is to recognize that it's all nature writing. The second, but pay very close attention to the details of the real physical world. That's my second piece of advice. To pay extreme attention to detail, real physical detail. Vladimir Nabokov, another one of my great mentors on the page, the great novelist, poet, and lepidopterist, said, as I quoted earlier, it talked about the high ridge between the mountainside of scientific knowledge and the opposite slope of artistic imagination. But the other thing he talked about is the individuating detail. He pays close attention to the individuating details between this thing and that thing, this elk and that elk, this leaf of grass and that leaf of grass. They're not the same. And so his novels, the difference between the people. Bill, you do that in your fiction. You have great detail of the people that you write. That's why your characters are so compelling. One of the reasons. Another one is you're a great action writer. You're nonfiction, of course, too, but that's because you're a master journalist and you know that. And you know the world is built on detail. You don't get a Pulitzer for writing that is general. So you attend great detail to those physical details and learn about them, learn stuff. You don't have to know all the facts to be a good nature writer. You don't have to know all the birds and the plants, but become a better naturalist every single day of your life. North Cascades Institute can help you to do that. And that's why I love North Cascades Institute. And I'm so glad to be here celebrating it tonight, because it's been the medium between people and the rest of nature for decades. That was Saul's vision, to bring people and the rest of nature together. And my, have they ever done that? And one way you do that is by attending to those great individual details and by learn the names of your neighbors. That's only respectful. You do it out for people on your street. So learn the names of a few birds, a few beetles, a few plants. You don't have to know them all, but learn some. Become a better naturalist all the time. And my final piece of advice to this person is this. The most compelling, another way of putting it is place-based writing. The most compelling place-based nonfiction or nature writing, if you want to say that, essays, to me, are those that have a strong personal presence of the writer, where the writer is present. Now, John McPhee got away with being almost not present and still being extremely compelling, but he is special. To me, you want, as your recent interrogatee, Leanda Lynn Haupt, you had last week. She's wonderful. And one of the things I love about Leanda's books, Crow Planet, and especially Mozart's Starling, is that she is there. Leanda's there. She's very much there. Bill's very much in his books, but not, and this is the key thing, not in a self-aggrandizing way, not in a self-promoting way, not in an ain't I big stuff way. You have a little bit of self-deprecation, but even that becomes self-regarding if you do that a little bit too much and too self-consciously. So you don't want to be self-regarding, but you want to be present there as a real person. Give us some of your thoughts, but don't overwhelm us with them. Don't overwhelm us with your rhetorical questions. I wonder what that crow is really thinking right now. Tell us what you think that crow might be thinking right now. So self in a modest, personal, real way that relates to our own experience. Then we know there's a real human being there. And so we as readers and human beings are more likely to read it. Secondly, extreme attention to detail and becoming a better naturalist every day. And third, just recognize that you are in nature everywhere you are.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are you going to write about your Bigfoot experience 2 days ago?
Boy, I don't know. I wrote about it in my journal. I'm certainly not going to put it online. I don't do Bigfoot stuff online. I'm not going to broadcast. I'm not going to go out there. I did not expect to do this tonight. I expect I'll more or less keep it under my hat, except for private confidences with 2 or 3 of my favorite Bigfoot students. Cliff Barrickman of Finding Bigfoot on TV. He's the smart one. And actually his buddy Bobo, who's kind of the joker on that show, he's a very smart man too, and a very dear man. I don't know Matt Moneymaker, the mouthy one. I don't know that guy, but I'm certain I'll share it with Scott and Cliff, who are really, really good guys, and a very few other people. Peter Byrne, my 95-year-old longtime Bigfoot mentor. Sure, I'll share it with Peter, but I don't think I'll write about it in any major way now. No, it's not enough. It was too brief. And anyway, it's going to take a lot of thinking about before I decide what to do with it. This was an impulse tonight.
I don't know, Bob. I might have to put it online. This is pretty good.
Yeah, thanks, Bill.
Well, and Kim, did just.
This is going to be online. So.
Yeah, we are recording this, and it is going to go on YouTube. So
Well, so much,
more than a couple people might see it.
so much for that. Well, I'll tell you this, I will own it. I said it, I had the experience, and like everything else I write, I'm not going to write something if I'm not going to own it.
Well, I have to say that I was really nervous because it took you a little while to tell us what the revelation was. And I was afraid that you were going to say you definitively, you believe that there is no Bigfoot, like you, and I was feeling scared and sad that that's what you were going to say.
Oh,
please don't say that.
Good. I hope I raised the tension for a number of the listeners. But I'll tell you this, you'll never hear me say that because one cannot say that. The old adage that my field of biology is biogeography and ecogeography, studying where particular plants and animals are and why they're not there. That's what I was doing at the Hanford Reach yesterday, trying to help to elaborate our appreciation of butterfly distribution in Washington. It got me here to Grays River 42 years ago. I'm still doing it. That's my great pleasure with butterflies, is finding where they occur, why not, why they are, how they're changing with climate change, which is extremely interesting. Some are winners, some are losers, But the old adage of biogeography is this, and you've heard it probably applied elsewhere. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. And it's almost impossible to demonstrate extinction. The Xerces blue, for which I named the Xerces Society, which is having its 50th anniversary this year, which is pretty amazing. That started out as our little volunteer group 50 years ago. It's now got 55 staff spread out across the country. They're all my grandchildren. It's doing wonderful things. But the Xerces blue, everybody agrees that it's extinct and has been since 1943. Pretty good evidence. Nobody's found it in the small limited habitat. There's even an effort now that I kicked off with an essay. Essays can matter. Essays can have consequences. And I wrote an essay a few years ago called Resurrection Ecology, Bring Back the Xerces Blue. And I recommended, based on an English experience with losing the large blue, I went to a lecture in 1971 and they said, we're going to lose the large blue in England. Let's make it a symbol so we don't lose any more. That's why I thought we've already lost the Xerces blue. Let's make that our symbol and have the Xerces Society. Well, later they did lose the large blue. It's not like this, like the birdwing butterflies I studied in New Guinea. The large blue is like this instead of like this. But they lost it. And then they found out how to manage for it too late. It's very complicated management needs it has, involving ants and things. And so once they got the habitat back in shape, they reintroduced it from Sweden, from a population that was somewhere between 100,000 and 1 million years removed from the British one, but still genetically fairly close to it. And now it's doing wonderfully in England, presumably evolving back toward the English type. So I suggested we take the nearest living relative of Xerces, which lives out in the dunes elsewhere in California, and reintroduce it to the Presidio, which was a military reservation where Xerces was last seen, has now become public land that's undergoing huge ecological restoration. They brought back the turtles, they brought back the frogs, they brought back 2 other species of butterflies and the food plant for Xerces. And I said, let's bring Xerces back with its nearest relative. That's now happening. So that's all very exciting. I can say with a great deal of confidence that there's no elephant in this room, but it's awfully hard to say that something is extinct, and nobody could ever reliably say that Bigfoot, Yeti, Almasti, Dalmas, and Yaren, the 5 species of Northern Hemisphere unnamed hominoid apes posited to exist. Nobody can say they don't.
Right.
All you can say is that your judgment leads you to conclude that they probably don't. And what I was saying is my judgment led me to think that Bigfoot probably did exist. And now my judgment has swung even farther in that direction.
Yay.
Sorry if I scared you for a little while.
Oh, well, that's okay. That's
I'm not
okay. It
reading
was
it.
worth it. It was
Yeah.
worth it.
It's more
So,
fun. That way. Well, here's to the Big Galoot.
yes.
And here's to the independent bookstores, all Village and all the others. And here's to the North Cascades Institute and to all the writers, Bill.
All right.
Yes, and Kim, if you're still there, I would love it if you would join us again on screen. That would just because if you're not, that's fine. I'm kind of putting you on the spot and you weren't expecting me to do this. So if you're not camera ready, that's okay. Oh, there she is. Excellent.
Hey,
Well, just because this is the last Nature of Writing series event for the season, for the quarter, and they'll start up again in the fall. Kim, I want to thank you so much for representing the NCI so well, and Bill, I want to thank you for again being our interlocutor or a guest at another event, and of course Bob.
What a scoop for a newsman, right?
Yes. Yeah. What are you gonna do with this, Bill? What are you gonna do
New
with
York Times
this?
tomorrow, Bob. I'm kidding you. I'm kidding you.
I don't care. I guess I don't care. That's fine. No,
Well, thank you.
no, you were here with Saul just last week, right, Bill?
Yes, yeah.
That one I had a conflict and couldn't get it. I'm gonna get that one online. Don't worry, I will not miss it. But I look forward to when we next get to sit down and have a beer together, Bill. And I look forward to my next visit to NCI and the Learning Center and my next visit to Village Books. I've spent some of my best times of my life in those two places and some of my most jolly visits with Bill. So this is good company and I'm happy to be in it. Thank you so much for inviting me back to Village Books and back to NCI. And thank
Yeah, a lot
you
of fun.
for your graciousness tonight.
Yeah, the invitation's always open. And I want to thank the audience for coming tonight. Of course, being the bookseller in the room, I did just put the link to the Village Books website where you can purchase our authors' books this evening. Kim, did you have any final words?
Thank you for having me. It was fantastic. I loved it. And just, I want to thank Claire one more time. Just thank you so much for having me here throughout this entire series. I'm very excited for our next fall series. This will be great. So thank you so much.
All right.
I have a final word, if I may, Claire.
Yes, sir.
Bill was going to ask me if I hadn't talked so long what I'm working on now. I would just like to say I'm working on a follow-up novel to Magdalena Mountain, possibly with some of the same characters. I have a new collection of poems accepted and on its way out from a third collection from Lost Horse Press. It's called The Last Man in Willapa. I have a book of Tia's poems, my late wife Tia's poems, called Part of Me, that's coming out, also from Lost Horse. And I'm starting a new book of essays, of all things. I'm not going to tell you what it's going to be called or anything, but I'll tell you this. It's not going to be yet another Jeremiad, Requiem, Litany of Loss, or Elegy. It's going to be about joy and gratitude and delight.
All right. Well,
Nice.
we look forward to all those things.
Thank you.
So thank you all. I think that is probably a fitting spot to say good night. So everybody be well, and hopefully we'll get to see you in person soon.
Thank you.